The status of women is the status of democracy. That's the message delivered by the United States Vice President Kamala Harris to this year's session of the Commission of the Status of Women at the United Nations in New York. This year's theme is examining women's full and effective participation and decision-making in public life and the empowerment of women and girls.
Here's the truth. When women face obstacles to obtaining quality health care, when women face food insecurity, when women are more likely to live in poverty and therefore disproportionately impacted by climate change, more vulnerable to gender-based violence and therefore disproportionately impacted by conflict, well, it's harder for women to fully participate in decision-making, which of course in turn makes it that much harder for democracies to thrive. Eleanor Roosevelt, who shaped the Universal Declaration on Human Rights, once said, "Without equality, there can be no democracy." In other words, the status of women is the status of democracy.
Sherwin Bryce-Pease is monitoring events for us at the United Nations. He joins us now from New York. So this is the first time, Sherwin, that the White House has been represented at the Commission on the Status of Women. And a speech by the Vice President, who is Kamala Harris, I'm sure not only historical, but very apt for this occasion.
But also, I think, a recognition, Sepiso, by the United States, by this White House, that there are relationships to repair at the United Nations. They've had quite a fraught relationship, certainly the previous administration of President Donald Trump with the United Nations, with the UN Security Council, withdrawing from the World Health Organization, withdrawing from the Human Rights Council, removing funding for the United Nations Population Fund. So a real sense that the Vice President, this White House, really seeking to recalibrate that relationship and also drawing a direct link between the words we heard from the former First Lady of the United States, who led the US delegation to that historic Beijing conference in 1995. Hillary Clinton, of course, making that very famous statement, Sepiso, which I'm sure you'll remember, that women's rights are human rights and human rights are women's rights. And I think Kamala Harris taking that message forward in terms of linking the women's rights agenda to the state of a national country's democracy. This is what she had to say.
Even as we confront a global health crisis, an economic crisis, it is critical that we continue to defend democracy. To that end, the United States is strengthening our engagement with the United Nations and the broader multilateral system. We are also rejoining the Human Rights Council because we know the status of democracy depends on our collective commitment to those values articulated in the Universal Declaration of Human Rights. The status of democracy also depends fundamentally on the empowerment of women, not only because the exclusion of women in decision-making is a marker of a flawed democracy, but because the participation of women strengthens democracy. And that's true everywhere.
Worth repeating, Sepiso, the status of democracy also depends fundamentally on the empowerment of women, and I don't think anyone anywhere will disagree with that.
Now, Sherwin, you've also just mentioned the fraught conditions that led to the relationship between the US and the United States, and it's been mainly over what we've witnessed over the last year, the disproportionate impact that COVID-19 has had on women and girls in particular. And that how it also speaks to the urgent need to have more women in leadership as we begin to build back better. Did the Vice President touch on this?
Yeah, she did, and very much echoing sentiments we've heard from other speakers like the Executive Director of UN Women earlier this week, Dr. Phumzile Mlambo-Nyuka, Sepiso, who spoke about the impacts on girls being out of school, the rise we are seeing in childhood pregnancies, teenage pregnancies, often as a result of non-consensual sex, the rise we are seeing in child marriages, the disproportionate impact we are seeing in terms of women and the labor sector, far more women work in the informal sector. So when a pandemic comes or when a crisis comes, these are the jobs that tend to go first. We are seeing a precipitous drop in the wages that women are receiving during this pandemic as opposed to what the impacts on men. This is how Kamala Harris sought to frame that discussion.
Women in the United States lead our local, state, and national governments, make major decisions regarding our nation's security, and drive major growth in our economy. These are signs of progress. These are signs of strength. But friends, we cannot take this progress for granted, especially now. COVID-19 has threatened the economic security, the physical security, and the health of women everywhere. As women struggle to get the health care they need, the pandemic appears to be reversing the global gains we've made in the fight against HIV/AIDS, tuberculosis, malaria, malnutrition, and maternal and child mortality. That's why, on the first day of our administration, the United States re-engaged as a member state and leader in the World Health Organization. And we are revitalizing our partnership with UN Women to help empower women worldwide.
Tepisa, she talks about signs of progress and strength, but the data shows us that at current levels, at the current pace, we will only reach parity at decision-making levels in terms of equity, gender equity, in the year 2150. That's about 130 plus years from now.
So, Sherwin, we've been having a general discussion, but how does the world's wealthiest and most powerful nations stack up on the question of women's leadership, particularly in the public sector?
The short answer is not very well, but we are seeing signs of improvement. I'll just run through some of the numbers, Sipi. So 142 women hold seats in the United States Congress. That's about 26.5%. 24 women serve in the 100-seat United States Senate, so that's 24%. U.S. ministerial positions, and I think this is a great example of the point that is coming out of this Commission on the Status of Women. What is the intention? Where is the political will? Are countries using special measures like quotas to set benchmarks to get more women into leadership positions? From 2020, the United States had women in ministerial positions at a level of 17%. Since the Biden-Harris administration has come into office, so that number has risen to 46%, and that is within a matter of months. So intention, I think, is very, very important in this discussion.
All right, thanks a lot for that, Sherwin Bryce-Pease, my colleague in New York.